May 5th, 1821. St. Helena Island, South Atlantic Ocean. Napoleon Bonaparte is dying. 51 years old. Exiled. Isolated on a volcanic rock 1,200 miles from the nearest continent. His liver is failing. His body is swollen. He can barely eat. The British guards outside his room are waiting for him to die, so they can send word back to London that the greatest threat to European stability has been neutralized. In his final days, Napoleon dictates his will. He divides his remaining possessions among family and loyalists. He leaves instructions for his burial. And somewhere in that room, as his personal valet Marchand tends to him, a few strands of beard hair are carefully collected and preserved. Not for sentiment, not for memory, but because even in 1821, people understood that physical remains carried weight, that hair, bone, clothing, these things connected the dead to the living in ways that went beyond words or monuments. Those beard hairs would sit in a reliquary for nearly 200 years, forgotten by most, ignored by historians. Until 2010, when a team of geneticists decided to extract DNA from them, and what they found didn't just confirm Napoleon's ancestry, it revealed something far more profound. Napoleon's Y-chromosome, the genetic signature passed from father to son without change, belonged to a lineage so ancient, so deeply rooted in Mediterranean Europe, that it predates the Roman Empire, predates classical Greece, predates written history entirely. His DNA links him directly to Neolithic farmers who arrived in southern Europe over 7,000 years ago. And here's the part that makes the story explosive. That same genetic signature exists today in millions of people. 7% of Sicilian men, 4% of Sardinians, hundreds of thousands of Greeks, Albanians, Italians living right now carry the exact same Y-chromosome lineage as Napoleon Bonaparte. This isn't about one man's ancestry. It's about the genetic foundation of southern Europe, and it starts with a handful of beard hairs collected on a dying emperor's last day. The reliquary that preserved Napoleon's hair wasn't some dusty attic discovery. It was assembled deliberately by Dominique Vivant-Denon, the first director of the Louvre, Napoleon's personal art advisor, and one of the most trusted figures in his inner circle. Denon didn't just collect Napoleon's hair. He built an entire collection of relics from French history. Voltaire's hair, Henry IV's hair, artifacts from figures who shaped France. The reliquary was catalogued, documented, passed down through generations with clear provenance. By 2010, when geneticist Gérard Lecoq approached the collection, the chain of custody was unbroken. No gaps. No mystery about where the hair came from or how it had been stored. This wasn't a questionable auction find or a dubious family heirloom. This was authenticated historical material, with 2 centuries of documentation behind it. Lecoq's team treated the hair with forensic precision. First step, confirm it's male, DNA. They used an amelogenin test, standard protocol for sex determination in genetic analysis. The result? Male. No ambiguity. Next step. Extract Y-chromosome DNA from the hair follicles. This is harder than it sounds. Hair degrades over time. DNA fragments. Contamination is a constant risk. But the follicles, the root of the hair where living cells once existed, still contained enough genetic material to analyze. Lecoq's team worked through a ladder of SNP markers. Single nucleotide polymorphisms, tiny variations in the genetic code that act like signposts pointing to specific branches of the human family tree. They tested M125. Positive. That places Napoleon in the E haplogroup. They tested M174. Negative. That rules out certain branches. M35. Positive. Narrowing it down. M33. Negative. Another branch eliminated. M123. Negative. M81. Negative. M78. Positive. Getting closer. Finally, N34. Positive. That's the terminal marker. E-M34. A rare but well-documented lineage concentrated in the Mediterranean, specifically southern Italy, Sicily, Greece, and parts of the Balkans. Napoleon's Y-chromosome didn't just confirm his Italian heritage. It placed him in a genetic lineage that's been in Europe for thousands of years. But here's where skeptics would normally raise questions. How do we know the hair actually belonged to Napoleon? How do we know it wasn't contaminated? How do we know the DNA wasn't from someone else? Lucas anticipated this. He found a living descendant, Charles Napoleon, great-great-great-nephew of Napoleon's brother Jérôme, direct male line. Unbroken father-to-son transmission from the early 1800s to the present day. If Charles Napoleon's Y chromosome matched the hair sample, that would be definitive proof. Charles agreed to the test. They extracted his DNA, analyzed 109 YSTR markers. These are short tandem repeats, sections of DNA that vary slightly between individuals, but remain almost identical in direct paternal lineages. They compared Charles's markers to the markers extracted from Napoleon's beard hair. All 109 markers matched perfectly. No discrepancies, no mutations, no gaps. This isn't just strong evidence. This is forensic certainty. In genetic genealogy, a 100% match across 109 YSTR markers means one thing. These two men share a direct paternal ancestor. The Y chromosome passes from father to son almost unchanged. Mutations occur, but they're rare. Maybe one mutation every few generations. To see 0 mutations across 109 markers over 7 generations? That's as close to absolute proof as genetic testing gets. Napoleon's DNA signature is real. It's confirmed, and it's Mediterranean European through and through. Now, what does EM34 actually mean? Let's zoom out. The human Y chromosome family tree has major branches called haplogroups, labeled with letters A, B, C, D, E, and so on. Each letter represents a split that happened thousands of years ago as human populations migrated out of Africa and spread across the world. Haplogroup E originated in East Africa. Some branches stayed in Africa. Others moved north into the Middle East and Europe. One of those branches, E1b1b, became foundational to Mediterranean populations. Within E1b1b, there are multiple sub-branches. E-V13 is common in the Balkans and Greece. E-M81 is concentrated in North Africa. E-M78 appears in Egypt and the Horn of Africa. E-M34 is Napoleon's branch. It's rarer than EV13, but it's deeply embedded in southern Italy, Sicily, Sardinia, and Greece. In Sicily, nearly 7% of men carry EM34. That's 1 in 14. Walk through a Sicilian town, and you'll pass multiple men with the same paternal lineage as Napoleon Bonaparte. In Sardinia, it's about 4%. In mainland southern Italy, Calabria, Campania, Apulia, the frequency ranges from 2 to 4%. In Greece, it appears in about 2% of the population. Albania, Kosovo, and parts of the Balkans show similar numbers. This isn't a rare exotic lineage, it's a common Mediterranean signature. Millions of people alive today carry EM34. And here's the critical point. EM34 isn't recent. It didn't arrive in Europe with Roman soldiers or medieval merchants. Archaeological genetics has traced related E1b1b branches back over 7,000 years. In 2011, researchers published findings in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. They'd extracted DNA from a Neolithic skeleton found in Spain, dated to approximately 7,000 years ago. The skeleton carried E1b1b, specifically E-V13. a sister branch to E-M34. This proves that E1B1b lineages were present in Europe during the Neolithic period, when the first farmers were spreading agriculture across the continent. EM34 split from its sister branches thousands of years ago. By the time recorded history began, it was already an established Mediterranean lineage. Napoleon's ancestors weren't recent arrivals. They were foundational to the genetic landscape of southern Europe. But let's get more specific. Who were Napoleon's ancestors? Where did they come from? How did his family end up in Corsica? The Bonaparte family, originally spelled Buonaparte, traces its documented history to the medieval town of Sarzana in Liguria, northern Italy. The earliest confirmed ancestor is named Gianfaldo Buonaparte, recorded in documents from around 1200 AD. For 3 centuries, the Bonapartes lived in and around Sarzana and Tuscany. They were minor nobility, not grand, not wealthy, but respectable. They worked as lawyers, notaries, civic officials. They appear in local records consistently. Marriage certificates, property transactions, wills. In 1490, everything changed. A man named Francesco Buonaparte left Sarzana and traveled to Corsica, not as a nobleman seeking land, as a mercenary. Specifically, he worked for the Bank of St. George, a Genoese financial institution that controlled Corsica at the time. Genoa had conquered Corsica in the 13th century and ruled it through a combination of military force and economic control. The Bank of St. George essentially governed the island as a profit-making venture. Francesco was hired as part of the security apparatus, a soldier protecting Genoese interests. He settled in Corsica, married a local woman, and established the Corsican branch of the Bonaparte family. And here's where the story takes an interesting turn. Francesco had a nickname, Il Moro, the Moor. In medieval and Renaissance Italy, nicknames based on physical appearance were ubiquitous. Someone with red hair might be called Il Rosso, someone fair-skinned, Il Bianco, someone with dark features, Il Moro. The term Moor, in this context, didn't mean African or Arab ancestry. It was a descriptor for Mediterranean appearance. Dark hair, dark eyes, olive skin. The features common across southern Europe. In fact, Italians used Moro the way modern people might say brunette or dark-complexioned. It was appearance, not ancestry. But the nickname stuck. For centuries, the Buonaparte family carried the story of Francesco il Moro, the man who brought the family to Corsica. And when Napoleon was born in 1769, 10 generations after Francesco, the family's Italian heritage was intact. The Buonapartes never claimed to be Corsican in origin. They knew they were Italian. They maintained Italian customs, spoke Italian at home, and identified with their Tuscan roots. Napoleon himself confirmed this repeatedly. In conversations with his personal physician, Dr. Francesco Antomarchi, Napoleon said, "My most remote ancestor who inhabited Tuscany had the principles that I profess." He wasn't inventing a lineage. He was stating a fact. He traced his family to Sarzana. He noted that Pope Nicholas V's mother was a Buonaparte from Sarzana, linking his family to both secular and religious power. Napoleon grew up speaking Corsican and Italian. French was his third language, learned at military school. He never lost his Italian accent. Classmates at the École Militaire in Brienne mocked him for it, called him the Italian. It bothered him, but he never denied it. His identity was Italian and Corsican first, French second. And now, 200 years after his death, science confirms it. His Y-chromosome is E-M34, a Mediterranean lineage that's been in Italy for millennia. The Buonaparte family's Italian heritage isn't just documented in records, it's written in DNA. But here's what makes this story more than just Napoleon's ancestry. E-M34 tells us something profound about European history. For centuries, Europe has told itself a story about distinct, pure populations. The English are Anglo-Saxon, the French are Gaulish, the Germans are Germanic, the Italians are Roman. These identities are reinforced by language, culture, and national mythology, but genetics reveals a different truth. Europe isn't a patchwork of pure populations that stayed in place for millennia. It's a genetic crossroads, shaped by waves of migration, conquest, trade, and intermarriage. The deepest European lineages, the ones that predate nations and empires, are shared across vast regions. E-M34 is one of those lineages. It appears in Sicily, Sardinia, Calabria, Greece, Albania, and the Balkans. It doesn't respect modern borders because it predates those borders by thousands of years. The men who carried EM34 into Europe weren't Italians or Greeks or Albanians. Those identities didn't exist yet. They were Neolithic farmers, early Bronze Age settlers, people who moved along coastlines and river valleys, planting crops, building settlements, and mixing with local populations. Over millennia, their descendants became the foundation of Mediterranean Europe. Napoleon carried that foundation in his DNA. Let's put this in perspective. Compare E-M34 to other major European lineages. R1b is the most common male haplogroup in Western Europe. It appears in 80% of Irishmen, 70% of Spaniards, 60% of Frenchmen. R1b traces its origins to the Pontic-Caspian steppe, the grasslands north of the Black Sea. Around 5,000 years ago, Bronze Age herders, often called the Yamnaya culture, began migrating west into Europe. They brought horses, wagons, and a new way of life. Over centuries, R1b became dominant in Western Europe through a combination of migration and population replacement. Today, most men in Britain, Ireland, France, Spain, and Portugal carry R1b. Another major lineage is I1, concentrated in Scandinavia. I1 traces back to Ice Age hunter-gatherers who survived in isolated refuges during the last glacial maximum. As the ice retreated, they repopulated northern Europe. Today, I1 is the signature lineage of Scandinavian populations. G2A is another ancient lineage. It appears in Italy and the Caucasus. G2A is associated with Neolithic farmers who brought agriculture from Anatolia into Europe around 8,000 years ago. These were the first farmers, people who shifted Europe from hunter-gatherer lifestyles to settled agricultural communities. Each of these lineages tells a story of migration, survival, and adaptation. R1b from the steppe, I1 from Ice Age refuges, G2A from Anatolian farmers, E-M34 from Neolithic Mediterranean settlers. None of these lineages are pure. They all mixed with existing populations. They all absorbed and contributed to the genetic diversity of Europe. And here's the critical point. Y-chromosome DNA only traces one line. Your father's 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 father, going back in an unbroken chain. But you have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents. Go back 10 generations, roughly to Napoleon's time, and you have 1,024 ancestors in that single generation. Go back 20 generations, to the 1500s, and you have over 1 million ancestors in that generation alone. Your Y chromosome traces only one of those million lines. Every other ancestor contributed to your DNA, but their Y chromosomes are lost to history, unless they had male descendants who survived. Napoleon's EM34 lineage tells us about his paternal line. It says nothing about his mother's ancestry, his grandmother's, his great-grandmother's, or the thousands of other ancestors who shaped his genetic makeup. But what it does tell us is significant. It confirms that his paternal line is deeply anciently Mediterranean European. It connects him to millions of people alive today, and it proves that identity isn't just about recent history or national borders. It's about the deep time of human migration and mixture. There's one more layer to this story that needs emphasis. The genetic testing wasn't just done on the beard hairs. It was confirmed through a living descendant. Charles Napoleon, born in 1950, is the great-great-great-nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, through Jérôme Bonaparte, Napoleon's youngest brother. Jérôme married Princess Katharina of Württemberg after his brother forced him to annul his first marriage to an American woman. Jérôme and Katharina had several children, and the male line continued through them. Charles Napoleon is the current head of the Imperial House of France, a title that carries no legal power, but maintains symbolic and historical significance. When geneticists asked Charles to provide a DNA sample, he agreed. His Y-chromosome was analyzed using 109 YSTR markers. These are repetitive sequences that vary slightly between individuals. In direct paternal lineages, YSTR markers should be almost identical. Mutations occur, but rarely. Typically, you'd expect to see 1 or 2 mutations across multiple generations. Charles's YSTR profile matched Napoleon's hair sample across all 109 markers. 0 mutations. Perfect concordance. This is extraordinary. It means that from Jérôme Bonaparte to Charles Napoleon, the Y chromosome passed unchanged through 7 generations. That's 166 years of unbroken transmission, with no detectable mutations. Statistically, this is highly unlikely, but it happened. And it provides absolute proof that the beard hair sample came from someone in Napoleon's direct paternal line. Combined with the historical provenance of the hair, documented by Denon, preserved in a known reliquary, the case is closed. Napoleon's Y chromosome is E-M34. Confirmed by both historical relic and living descendant. The science is settled. So what does all this mean? Why does Napoleon's DNA matter? First, it confirms something Napoleon himself always believed. He was Italian. Corsican by birth, but Italian by ancestry. His family's roots in Tuscany and Liguria weren't invented. They were real. The Bonaparte name, the family's documented history in Sardinians, the traditions they maintained, all of it checks out. Napoleon knew who he was. He didn't need a DNA test to tell him. But for historians, genealogists, and anyone curious about European ancestry, Napoleon's DNA offers a broader lesson. Identity isn't fixed, it's layered. Napoleon was Corsican. He was Italian. He became French. He ruled an empire that stretched from Spain to Poland. His identity shifted depending on context, on politics, on ambition. But underneath all those layers, his paternal lineage remained constant. E-M34. Mediterranean, European, Neolithic. That lineage predates nations. It predates empires. It predates the concept of France or Italy or Corsica. It's the genetic foundation of Southern Europe, carried by millions of people who share the same deep ancestry. Second, Napoleon's DNA reminds us that ancestry is shared. The idea that royal bloodlines are special, unique, or set apart from common populations is myth. Napoleon's Y chromosome appears in 7% of Sicilian men. Farmers, fishermen, shopkeepers, teachers. Thousands of ordinary people walking around Sicily today carry the same paternal lineage as one of history's most famous emperors. There's nothing exclusive or rare about it. It's common, shared, human. This doesn't diminish Napoleon. It connects him. It shows that even emperors are part of the broader human story, woven into populations and migrations that stretch back thousands of years. Third, Napoleon's DNA shows the limits and the power of genetic testing. Y-chromosome analysis is incredibly precise for tracing paternal lineages, but it's also narrow. It only follows one line out of thousands. Napoleon had 2 Bonaparte parents, 4 Bonaparte grandparents, 8 Bonaparte great-grandparents. His full ancestry is far more complex than his Y chromosome alone can reveal. If we tested his autosomal DNA, the mix of genetic material inherited from all ancestors, we'd see contributions from across Europe. Southern Italian, Corsican, Tuscan, possibly Greek, possibly traces of other Mediterranean populations. His mother's side, the Ramolinos, were also Corsican and Italian. They contributed half of his DNA, but without autosomal testing, we can't map that side in detail. The Y chromosome is one thread in a vast tapestry. It's important, it's revealing, but it's not the whole story. And that's fine, because even one thread, traced carefully, can tell us something profound about where we come from. Napoleon's EM34 lineage is that thread. It connects him to Neolithic Europe, to modern Mediterranean populations, to the deep history of human migration and settlement. And in a world where identity is often contested, where borders shift and nations rise and fall, DNA offers something solid. Not myth, not propaganda, just evidence. The evidence is clear. Napoleon Bonaparte's paternal line is Mediterranean European.